The ring felt heavier than it should have in William Hartford's calloused palm. 62 years old, kneeling on the scuffed linoleum of Riverside Cafe, while 40 strangers held their collective breath, and all he could think about was how Helen's hands had trembled when he'd first slid this band onto her finger 43 years ago. Different stone now reset by a jeweler on Milwaukee Avenue who'd listened to the whole story and only charged for the labor. The diamond caught the winter light streaming through the cafe's front windows, throwing fractured rainbows across Rosalind Keating's face. She stood there, 56 years old, balancing on crutches, left pant leg folded and pinned where her leg ended just below the knee. Her eyes were wet, but her mouth formed a line Will had learned to read over the past 18 months. The expression she wore when pulling away hurt more than staying ever could. "I can't replace Helen." The words landed like stones in still water ripples spreading through the watching crowd. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. The espresso machine hissed behind the counter, indifferent to the small tragedy unfolding at table 7. "And you can't fix what's broken in me." Will's knees protested against the hard floor, 30 years of carrying hoses up burning stairwells demanding payment. He stayed down anyway because standing meant accepting her answer, and he'd learned in his 6 decades that some moments required you to hold position even when every instinct screamed retreat. The ring box snapped shut with a sound that might as well have been a door slamming. 18 months earlier. December 2019, the same cafe had been just as crowded but infinitely colder. Will Hartford sat across from his granddaughter Ivy in their usual booth by the window, watching her push scrambled eggs around her plate with the methodical precision of someone performing a necessary ritual rather than eating breakfast. 8 years old, dark hair cut short because she'd asked for it that way after her father's funeral, eyes that held more grief than any child should carry. She wore the purple hoodie Harrison had given her for her 6th birthday, 2 months before the warehouse fire that made Will a widower and a single father in the same season. The cafe smelled like coffee and maple syrup and the particular warmth of a place that had absorbed decades of conversation into its walls. Riverside had opened in 1978, the year Will joined Chicago Fire Department. He'd brought Helen here on their 10th anniversary because the steakhouse they'd planned on had burned down the week before. Occupational irony that made them both laugh until Helen cried. They'd kept coming back every Saturday morning for 40 years, until cancer took her ability to keep anything down and then took everything else. Tommy Brennan emerged from the kitchen carrying a pot of coffee, 68 years old, and moving with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned to pace himself. The cafe had been his since '92, bought with money from a settlement after his back gave out working construction. His wife Martha had run the register until a stroke killed her 9 years ago. Now he did both jobs and complained about neither. "Your girl, okay?" Will glanced at Ivy, who showed no sign of having heard. She hadn't spoken in public for 2 years, not since the double funeral that buried both her father and grandmother in the same week. At home alone with Will, she'd whisper sometimes. Never full conversations, just fragments. Questions about whether Grandma Helen hurt when the cancer got bad. Whether Dad knew the ceiling was going to collapse. Whether Will was going to die too and leave her completely alone. The child psychologist they saw twice a week called it selective mutism, a trauma response. Dr. Patricia Brennan, no relation to Tommy, though they joked about starting a Brennan dynasty, said Ivy's silence was a form of control in a world that had proven catastrophically uncontrollable. She'd talk again when she felt safe. The prescription was patience routine and absolutely no pressure. Will had been a firefighter long enough to know that some rescues took time. You couldn't rush someone out of a burning building if the stairs had collapsed. You had to find another way down, even if it meant going slow. "She's processing." Tommy refilled Will's mug without asking, a kindness worn smooth by repetition. The coffee was too hot and too strong, exactly how Will had drunk it for 3 decades of overnight shifts. Helen used to say he'd pickled his insides with department coffee, that she'd bury him, and the autopsy would find his stomach preserved like a specimen in formaldehyde. She'd been joking. She'd buried her instead, and the joke turned into prophecy he'd never get to share. Natalie called yesterday. The name hung between them like smoke. Natalie Hartford Harrison's widow. Ivy's mother, currently living in a one-bedroom apartment in Evanston and working part-time at a Target while attending court-mandated therapy sessions. She'd spent 8 months in a psychiatric facility after Harrison died, the kind of breakdown that started with not getting out of bed and ended with police finding her trying to walk into Lake Michigan in January wearing only a nightgown. Will had been granted emergency custody of Ivy while Natalie was hospitalized. When she got out, the temporary arrangement became permanent by mutual agreement. Natalie wasn't ready and Ivy needed stability. But 18 months of therapy had convinced Natalie she was ready now. The custody hearing was scheduled for April, 4 months away. Will's lawyer said the case was complicated. Grandparents' rights existed but weren't absolute. Biological mothers had presumptive custody unless proven unfit, and had a mental health crisis while grieving her husband wasn't going to cut it. The judge would interview Ivy, evaluate both homes, make a determination based on the child's best interests. Will lay awake most nights wondering whose interests those were. Ivy whispered to him in the dark, sometimes crawling into his bed when nightmares woke her. She'd ask if Mommy was going to take her away from Grandpa. He'd say nobody was taking anybody anywhere, they were just figuring things out. She'd ask if he promised. He'd say yes, because what else could he say to a child who'd already learned that the people you love can disappear without warning? Tommy wiped down the counter with a rag that had been white sometime in the previous decade. She wants her back, not a question. Tommy had known Harrison since the kid was 16 and started bussing tables summer of 2002. He'd been at the wedding, the baptism, both funerals. He knew the whole architecture of Will's grief. She's Ivy's mother, and you're her grandfather who's been raising her for 3 years. Will took a long drink of scalding coffee, let it burn all the way down. The law doesn't care much about grandfathers. The door chimed, admitting a gust of December wind and a woman who moved like someone navigating enemy territory. Mid-50s maybe, though, grief had a way of aging people beyond calendars. She wore a black wool coat over jeans and a gray sweater. Dark hair pulled back in a style that suggested efficiency over vanity. The crutches were the kind with forearm supports, professional-grade medical equipment rather than temporary injury rentals. Her left pant leg was folded and pinned where the leg ended. Will watched her scan the cafe with the particular desperation of someone looking for something they were fairly certain wouldn't be there. Every table was occupied Saturday morning at Riverside meant standing room only from 8 until noon. The woman's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch with each rejection her eyes registered. She started moving through the narrow aisles between tables, and Will could track her progress by the subtle shifts in body language from the other customers. People leaning away. Purses pulled closer. The careful avoidance of eye contact that let them pretend they hadn't noticed her approaching. She stopped at a table where 2 women in yoga pants sat with shopping bags piled on the empty chairs. Will couldn't hear the exchange, but he watched the yoga women glance at each other, a silent conversation happening in the space between heartbeats. One of them shook her head. The stranger moved on. Next table, a young couple absorbed in their phones, barely looking up when the woman asked her question. The boyfriend shook his head without putting down his phone. The girlfriend found something fascinating in her latte. Next table, an older man with the Tribune spread across half the table, taking up space like he'd paid rent on it. He looked up, saw the crutches, and something crossed his face, not quite disgust, but close enough to its cousin that Will felt his jaw tighten. The man gestured vaguely toward the front of the cafe, words that looked like, "I'm sure there's space somewhere else," and returned to his newspaper. Ivy had stopped pushing her eggs around. She was watching the woman with the focused intensity she usually reserved for the nature documentaries she liked, the ones about animals adapting to harsh environments. Will saw his granddaughter's small hand tighten around her fork knuckles, going white. The woman tried 2 more tables. A group of teenagers who laughed, actually laughed, before one of them said something that made the others crack up harder. A business type in a suit who didn't even wait for the question before shaking his head, holding up a hand like a traffic cop. "Stop. No. Full. Sorry. Not sorry. Grandpa." The word came out so quiet, Will almost missed it. He looked at Ivy, whose eyes were still locked on the stranger now standing near the door, clearly preparing to leave. "Grandpa, why is everyone being mean?" The question cracked something open in Will's chest. These were Ivy's first public words in 2 years, and she'd spent them on a stranger's pain rather than her own. Dr. Brennan had said the breakthrough would come when Ivy felt safe enough to use her voice for something that mattered more than her silence. Apparently witnessing casual cruelty mattered. The woman in the black coat had her hand on the door handle when Ivy's small voice cut through the ambient noise. "She can sit here." Ivy pointed at the empty side of their booth, the space where Helen used to sit, where Harrison would squeeze in on the rare Saturdays he wasn't working, where nobody had sat since February 2016, because Will couldn't bear to see anyone else in that spot. Will's throat went tight. He looked at his granddaughter, 8 years old and trembling slightly with the effort of having spoken where people could hear. Her eyes met his, asking permission for something she'd already decided to do. The stranger turned from the door. She was close enough now that Will could see the tear tracks on her face, old ones she'd wiped away, but which had left traces. Her eyes found Ivy, then Will, then the empty booth bench, and something like hope warred with exhaustion across her features. "Are you sure?" Will heard himself say yes before he'd consciously decided to. Ivy was already scooting over, making more room, gathering the stack of napkins and crayons she'd been using to draw into a smaller pile. The woman navigated the narrow path to their table with practiced efficiency, each placement of the crutches calculated and deliberate. Up close, Will could see the fine lines around her eyes, the kind that came from squinting against pain rather than smiling at sunshine. She lowered herself onto the bench with the careful control of someone who'd learned to do this without help, without making it look like she needed help. "I'm Roz." Her voice carried the faint rasp of someone who didn't use it much, or who'd spent a lot of time crying. She set her crutches against the wall beside the booth, angled so they wouldn't fall. "Will." He gestured toward Ivy, who was staring at the new arrival with open fascination. "This is Ivy, my granddaughter." Roz managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you for the space. I know Saturday morning probably isn't the time for strangers crashing your breakfast." Ivy slid a piece of paper across the table, one of her drawings. A simple sketch done in crayon, a stick figure with one leg standing under a bright yellow sun. Next to the figure, a smaller stick figure held the taller one's hand. Roz picked up the drawing, studied it for a long moment, and then her face did something complicated. The smile dropped away, replaced by naked emotion too raw to name. She pressed the paper to her chest like it was a talisman against forces Will could only guess at. "Is today a special day?" Ivy's question came out whisper soft, but it was a question addressed to someone who wasn't Will, which made it a miracle on par with loaves and fishes. Roz folded the drawing carefully, running her finger along the creases like she was memorizing the pattern. "It's my birthday. My second one since—" She stopped. The sentence hung unfinished, heavy with everything she couldn't or wouldn't say. Tommy appeared with a menu and a mug of coffee, black, no question about preference. He'd been watching from behind the counter, and Will could read the question in his old friend's eyes. "You sure about this?" Will gave the slightest nod. Tommy set down the coffee and disappeared back into the kitchen. Since what Will kept his voice gentle, the tone he'd used with Ivy when she first came to live with him, the one that said, "You don't have to answer, but I'm here if you want to." Roz wrapped both hands around the coffee mug like she was trying to pull warmth from it into her bones. "Since I lost everything." The words fell into the space between them, small and enormous all at once. Ivy stopped pretending to eat her eggs. Will felt the familiar weight of other people's grief, the particular burden of knowing that whatever you said next would either help or hurt, and there was no way to know which until after you'd already said it. "I'm sorry." Inadequate, but what else was there? Grief was a country with no useful maps, no shortcuts back to the border. You just had to walk through it until you reached something that looked like the other side. Roz's laugh came out, broken sharp edges that cut on the way up. March 2017. Drunk driver ran a red light, T-boned our car. My husband Martin died on impact. Our son Elliot died in the ambulance. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed, and they told me I was the only survivor, and that they'd had to amputate my leg to get me out of the wreckage. The cafe noise seemed to recede, or maybe Will's hearing had just narrowed to the woman across from him whose world had ended on a Tuesday afternoon because someone decided to drive after too many drinks. He knew that particular species of loss, the kind that came from someone else's choices, from circumstances beyond any control. Elliot was 28, a firefighter off duty that day. He'd just stopped by to help his father pick up lumber for a deck we were building. 5 minutes, that's all. 5 minutes to load the truck, and then they were going to meet me at Home Depot. I was running late because of a surgery that went long. I'm a nurse, was a nurse. I saw the accident happen. I was 2 cars behind them at the light. Will's chest constricted. He'd spent 30 years responding to car accidents, pulling bodies from twisted metal, performing CPR on steering wheels and asphalt. He'd learned to compartmentalize to separate the work from the human cost. But sitting across from someone who'd lived through the other side of those calls, who'd been the family member waiting at the hospital instead of the first responder arriving at the scene, that was different. Your son was a firefighter. Not a question, but Roz nodded anyway. Like your grandson's father, I'm guessing. I saw how you looked when I mentioned it. Will glanced at Ivy, who was absorbing this conversation with the stillness of someone listening to a language they were learning to speak. Harrison. He died in a warehouse fire 3 years ago. Ceiling collapsed while he was carrying out 2 kids who'd broken in to smoke weed. Got the kids out. Didn't make it back for himself. 1 month after I buried my wife. The timeline spilled out before Will could stop it. The awful arithmetic of his losses. Helen in February, pancreatic cancer that took her from diagnosis to death in 11 weeks. Harrison in March died doing the job he'd loved since he was 18 years old, the job he'd joined because his father had done it first. Natalie's breakdown in April. Emergency custody of Ivy in May. Retirement from the department in June, because walking into Engine 51 without his son there felt like drowning on dry land. Roz reached across the table, hesitated, then laid her hand over Will's. Her fingers were cold from the December morning, but her grip was steady. Our sons were heroes. The words hit Will somewhere behind his sternum, in the place that still kept Harrison's last voicemail saved on his phone, the one where his son called just to say he loved his old man and was proud to wear the same badge. Will hadn't been able to listen to it in 2 years, but he couldn't delete it either. They were. Tommy reappeared carrying a small slice of chocolate cake with a single candle stuck in the center, already lit. He set it down in front of Roz without ceremony. On the house. Nobody should spend their birthday alone. Then, before anyone could respond, Tommy Brennan started singing. His voice was gravelly off-key, completely sincere. Happy birthday to you. Several people at nearby tables turned to look. Happy birthday to you. Will found himself joining in his own voice, rough from disuse. He hadn't sung anything since Helen's funeral. Happy birthday, dear Rosalind. Ivy was humming along, not quite words, but close enough to count. Happy birthday to you. By the second verse, half the cafe had joined in. Strangers who'd refused Roz a seat 10 minutes ago were now singing to her, clapping along, and the absurdity of it mixed with something Will couldn't quite name. The performance was chaotic, beautiful, completely ridiculous. Roz sat, frozen tears streaming down her face, one hand still holding Ivy's drawing like a lifeline. When the song ended, the cafe erupted in applause. Someone whistled, a child laughed. Tommy set down a fork and a napkin, gave Rose's shoulder a gentle squeeze, and retreated back to the kitchen before the emotion could get too heavy to carry. Roz made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She wiped at her eyes with the napkin, but the tears kept coming. 2 years of pressure, finding a crack in the dam. I haven't cried since the funeral. Not once. I couldn't. It was like something in me froze, and I couldn't thaw it out no matter what I tried. Therapy, medication, support groups. Nothing worked. I've just been numb for 27 months. And now I'm crying in a cafe in front of strangers because an 8-year-old gave me a drawing and you all sang happy birthday like I deserved it. You do deserve it. Ivy's voice still quiet but gaining strength. The words of a child who understood perhaps better than any adult could what it meant to have the world take everything and leave you standing in the wreckage wondering why you survived. Roz looked at Ivy like she was seeing a miracle. How old are you, sweetheart? 8? I'm in 3rd grade. My teacher is Mrs. Patterson. She's nice, but she gives too much homework. The normalcy of the complaint made all 3 of them smile. Will felt something unknot in his chest watching his granddaughter talk to a stranger about homework like it was the most natural thing in the world. Dr. Brennan had said the breakthrough would be gradual, that Ivy would need to feel completely safe before her voice came back. Apparently, Rosalind Keating's grief had provided the safety that 2 years of therapy hadn't quite reached. "Do you like to draw?" Ivy nodded, suddenly animated. "I draw a lot. Animals, mostly. Sometimes people. Grandpa Will says I'm good at it, but he's probably just being nice because he's my grandpa. I'm not just being nice." Will's protest was automatic, the kind of defense grandparents launched on behalf of their grandchildren's talents. But looking at the drawing, Roz still held the simple stick figure standing under the sun. He realized Ivy had captured something true. The figure wasn't detailed or realistic, but it conveyed presence, dignity, someone standing despite everything trying to knock them down. "You are good at it." Roz studied the picture again. "This is me, isn't it? With one leg standing in the sun." Ivy nodded. "You were sad. So I drew you happy." The statement was so straightforward it circled back to profound. Roz pressed the papers to her chest again, and Will understood he was witnessing something sacred. A child offering comfort to a stranger, and the stranger accepting it without pride or pretense. They talked for another hour. Conversation wandered through safe territories, favorite foods, books. Ivy was reading The Best Pizza in Chicago, whether winter or summer was superior. Roz had grown up on the South Side, daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher, the middle of 3 kids. She'd put herself through nursing school, working nights at a diner, met Martin at the hospital where she did her clinical rotation, married him 6 months later. Elliot had been their only child, born after 3 miscarriages that had nearly convinced them to stop trying. He'd joined the fire academy at 21, made his father cry with pride at graduation. Will shared pieces of his own story, the parts that didn't hurt too much to speak aloud. 40 years with the department, starting when Chicago still had pull-box alarms and rotary phones in the engine houses. Meeting Helen at a community center dance in 1976, too shy to ask her out until his buddy Tommy Different. Tommy, one who died in a roof collapse in '89, pushed him across the floor and said if he didn't ask her to dance, Tommy would do it himself. Harrison, born in 1984, wanted to be a firefighter from the age of 5, used to slide down the pole at the station when Will brought him to visit. The stories built bridges between them, spans across the chasms of their separate griefs. By the time Roz glanced at her watch and realized she'd been there for 90 minutes, the cafe had cleared out some, the Saturday morning rush giving way to the mid-morning lull. "I should go. Let you two get on with your day." But she didn't move, and Will didn't suggest she should. "Do you come here every Saturday?" The question came from Ivy, who'd been quiet for the past few minutes, content to listen while she drew another picture, this one showing 3 stick figures at a table, cups of coffee between them. "We do. Same table, same time. It's our tradition." Ivy looked up at Roz with an expression Will had seen on Harrison's face 1,000 times, the particular mix of hope and determination that meant the wheels were turning toward a plan. "You could come back next week, if you want. We're always here." Roz's eyes found Will's, asking permission for something neither of them had named yet. He gave the slightest nod. "I'd like that, if it's okay with your grandpa." "More than okay." The words came out rougher than Will intended, weighted with the sudden understanding that he'd just invited someone new into the sacred space he'd been protecting for 3 years. Helen's booth. Harrison's Saturday mornings, the routine that had kept him and Ivy afloat when everything else was drowning them. But Ivy was talking to a stranger, and that stranger was crying for the first time in 2 years, and maybe grief recognized grief in ways that healing couldn't touch. Roz gathered her crutches, maneuvered out of the booth with the practiced grace of someone who'd learned to navigate a world built for 2 legs. She looked down at Ivy's drawing, the 3 figures at the table. "Can I keep this?" Ivy beamed. "It's for you, so you remember to come back. I won't forget." Will walked Roz to the door, Ivy trailing behind, suddenly shy again now that the spell of conversation had broken. Outside, December wind bit through the cafe's warmth, promising snow before nightfall. Roz pulled her coat tighter, balanced on her crutches, and met Will's eyes with an intensity that suggested she understood the gift they'd just given each other. "Thank you. For the seat. For the song. For not looking away. Thank you for coming back." He hadn't planned to say it, but the words felt true. Some part of him had already accepted that next Saturday would include Rosalind Keating, that the shape of their mornings had shifted to accommodate a 3rd presence at the table. Roz smiled, a real one this time, the first he'd seen that reached her eyes. "See you next week, Will Hartford." "You too, Ivy." She turned and made her way down the sidewalk, navigating patches of ice with the caution of someone who'd learned that falling had consequences. Will and Ivy stood in the doorway until she turned the corner and disappeared from view. "Grandpa." "Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad she's coming back." "Me too." They went back inside where Tommy was wiping down their table, boxing up the leftover cake Roz had barely touched. He caught Will's eye and raised an eyebrow in question. "Next Saturday." Tommy grinned. "Thought so. That one's got good bones. Broken but good. Like somebody else I know." Will paid the check, left his usual 20% plus 10 because Tommy had sung, and walked Ivy out to his truck. The drive back to his apartment took 15 minutes through streets he'd traveled for 4 decades. Every block held memories. Houses he'd entered carrying hoses, intersections where he'd directed traffic around accidents, the elementary school where Harrison had learned to read. His apartment was a 2-bedroom in a building that had been new in 1987, now showing its age in cracked tile and temperamental heating. Will had moved here after Helen died because the house they'd raised Harrison in was too full of ghosts. He'd kept it sparse, functional. Couch, television, kitchen table. Ivy's room had more personality: drawings taped to walls, shelves filled with books, the stuffed elephant Harrison had won at Navy Pier when she was 3. They spent the afternoon the way they spent most Saturdays. Will did laundry while Ivy worked on homework. They made grilled cheese for lunch. Ivy drew more pictures while Will reviewed documents his lawyer had sent about the custody hearing. Legal language that boiled down to Natalie had rights. Will had temporary guardianship. The court would decide what served Ivy's best interests, and nobody could predict which way the judge would lean. He thought about Rosalind Keating more than he expected to. The way she'd looked at Ivy's drawing like it was the first kindness she'd received in years. The fact that her son had been a firefighter, same as Harrison, same as Will. The strange synchronicity of their losses, mirror images reflected across different years. He wondered if she was thinking about them too, wherever she'd gone after leaving the cafe. He wondered if she'd actually come back next Saturday, or if the moment would pass and she'd realize she didn't need whatever it was they'd offered her. Ivy asked about her before bed. "Do you think Miss Roz is lonely?" Will tucked the blankets around his granddaughter, smoothed her hair back from her forehead the way Helen used to do. "Probably. When you lose people you love, it's hard not to feel lonely, even if other people are around, especially then, sometimes." Ivy considered this, her face serious in the dim light from the hallway. "I'm glad we let her sit with us. I think she needed friends." "I think you're right." Will kissed her forehead, turned on the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon, and closed the door to a crack. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to Ivy's breathing settle into sleep rhythms, grateful beyond measure that she was here, terrified of the April hearing that might take her away. His phone buzzed. Text from Natalie. "Can I take Ivy to the zoo next weekend? Supervised visit. My therapist can come if that makes you more comfortable." "I'm ready, Will. I know you don't believe me, but I'm ready to be her mom again." Will stared at the message, typed and deleted 3 responses, finally settled on, "Let me think about it. Talk tomorrow." He couldn't tell Natalie no forever. The judge would see that as obstruction. But every supervised visit was another piece of evidence that Natalie was functional, stable, capable of parenting. Which was good for Natalie, good for Ivy in theory, and absolutely terrifying for Will, who'd built his entire existence around being the one constant in his granddaughter's life. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out the photo album Helen had kept. 40 years of Saturdays at Riverside Cafe, documented in Polaroids and later in digital prints she'd ordered from Walgreens. Will and Helen in their 20s, impossibly young. Harrison as a baby covered in pancake syrup. Harrison as a teenager rolling his eyes at his parents' affection. Harrison with Natalie on their first date, both of them nervous and trying not to show it. Ivy's first birthday chocolate cake smeared across her face while Harrison laughed in the background. The last photo in the album was from January 2016, 1 month before Helen died. She'd asked a stranger to take it. Will, Helen, Harrison. Natalie and Ivy all squeezed into the booth. 5 people who'd thought they had decades left together. Helen's hair was gone from the chemo, covered by a scarf Ivy had picked out. Harrison had his arm around his mother, protective, loving, completely unaware he had 2 months left to live. Will's hand was on Helen's shoulder, holding on like he could keep her in the world through force of will alone. He closed the album before the grief could pull him under. Tomorrow was Sunday. He'd make pancakes for breakfast, take Ivy to the aquarium if she wanted, avoid thinking about custody hearings and lonely women at coffee shops, and all the ways life could split you open and leave you standing. But Monday came anyway, and Tuesday and Wednesday. Will worked the handful of consulting gigs he'd picked up since retirement, fire safety assessments for businesses, expert testimony in arson cases, anything to keep his skills sharp and contribute to Ivy's college fund. Natalie called on Thursday, and he agreed to the zoo visit supervised by her therapist 2 hours on Sunday afternoon. Ivy was excited, which made Will happy and terrified in equal measure. Friday night, Ivy asked what they were doing tomorrow. Riverside, same as always. Will didn't mention that he'd been thinking about it all week, wondering if Roz would actually show up or if the moment had passed. He told himself it didn't matter either way. Their tradition would continue with or without her. But Saturday morning, December 14th, Will found himself arriving 15 minutes early. Tommy noticed, raised an eyebrow, said nothing. Will ordered coffee, scanned the cafe door every time it opened. Ivy drew pictures, occasionally glancing up to ask if Miss Roz was coming yet. 9:30 came and went, their usual arrival time. Will told himself Roz had changed her mind, decided she didn't need their particular brand of broken company. That was fine. They'd managed alone for 3 years. They'd continue managing. 9:45. Will started on his second cup of coffee, considering ordering breakfast. Maybe they'd misread the whole thing. 9:52. The door opened. Rosalind Keating walked in, bundled against the cold, scanning the cafe until her eyes found their table. The smile that crossed her face was tentative, hopeful, the expression of someone who'd shown up despite every instinct to stay home. Ivy waved a full-arm gesture that attracted attention from nearby tables. Roz navigated the crowded cafe, lowered herself into the booth across from them, and let out a breath that seemed to carry a week's worth of tension. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Will's admission surprised him with its honesty. "I almost didn't. Must have stood outside for 10 minutes talking myself into it. I'm glad you came inside." "Me too." The second Saturday, Rose brought a sketchbook. She pulled it from her bag after they'd ordered, set it on the table between coffee cups and syrup dispensers like an offering. The cover was worn leather corners, softened by handling pages thick enough to hold watercolor without buckling. Ivy reached for it without asking permission, the way children did when something beautiful demanded touching. Roz didn't pull it away. She watched Ivy's small fingers trace the embossed pattern on the cover, some kind of Celtic knot that looped back on itself endlessly. "My son gave this to me. For my 50th birthday. He said I should start drawing again, that just because I'd stopped being a nurse didn't mean I had to stop being creative." Ivy opened to the first page. A pencil sketch of a man's face, strong jaw, laugh lines around eyes that crinkled with joy, even rendered in graphite. The technical skill was evident, precise shading, careful attention to the way light fell across features. But what struck Will was the love visible in every stroke, the intimacy of knowing someone well enough to capture not just how they looked, but who they were. "That's Elliot, 3 months before he died." Ivy turned pages, carefully revealing more sketches. An older man working on a car engine, a house with a wide front porch, a golden retriever sleeping in a patch of sunlight, each drawing precise, detailed, infused with quiet attention. The last 10 pages were blank. "I haven't drawn anything since the accident. Couldn't make my hand work right. Tried a few times, but nothing came out." Ivy closed the book, gently slid it back across the table. "Maybe you need the right thing to draw first." Roz's smile carried weight, the kind that acknowledged wisdom from unexpected sources. "Maybe I do." Tommy arrived with breakfast pancakes for Ivy, scrambled eggs and toast for Will, oatmeal for Roz. They ate in comfortable silence. Outside, December, snow had started falling, fat flakes that stuck to the window and turned Milwaukee Avenue into a postcard scene. Will found himself watching Roz when she wasn't looking, the way she cut her toast into precise squares before eating it, how she held her coffee mug with both hands pulling warmth from the ceramic. The subtle wince when she shifted position accommodating the prosthetic that was never quite comfortable. She caught him staring, once raised an eyebrow in question. He looked away suddenly, 14 years old and awkward. Your granddaughter talks now. Last week she barely said 10 words. Today she hasn't stopped. Will glanced at Ivy, who was explaining something complicated about the difference between African and Asian elephants. You're good for her. She hasn't opened up like this with anyone except me and her therapist. I'm not doing anything special, just listening. That's the special part. The conversation settled into rhythm over the following weeks. Third Saturday, Roz asked about Will's career, and he found himself telling stories he hadn't shared in years. The warehouse fire on Canal Street in '94, the apartment building evacuation in 2003, the department funeral for a fallen firefighter in '89. Roz listened with the attention of someone who understood that these stories weren't about bravery, but about survival, about the weight of carrying bodies out of buildings and the ones you couldn't save haunting you decades later. Fourth Saturday, January now, and bitter cold, Roz told them about nursing. 30 years in emergency rooms, starting as a floor nurse at County and working up to trauma coordinator at Northwestern. The overdoses that came in waves. The car accidents on holidays. The gang violence that spiked every summer. I loved it. That's the part nobody understands. I loved working in chaos, making split-second decisions, being the calm center when everything was falling apart. And then the accident happened, and suddenly I couldn't be in hospitals anymore. The smell of antiseptic made me nauseous. The sound of monitors beeping triggered panic attacks. What happened? Gunshot victim came in. Young kid, maybe 16. His blood pressure was crashing and I couldn't. My hands started shaking so badly I had to step away. Another nurse took over. The kid lived, but I knew I was done. Put in my resignation that night. Ivy had been coloring, apparently not listening. But she looked up, then her voice carrying simple clarity. Do you miss it? Roz considered the question with visible care. I miss who I was when I was doing it. I miss feeling useful. But I don't miss the work itself, if that makes sense. It's like imagine loving something that hurts you. You can remember the good parts without wanting to go back. Fifth Saturday, late January. Rose brought another drawing. A portrait of Ivy, captured mid-laugh hair, flying joy radiating from graphite lines. The technical skill was impressive, but what took Will's breath was the emotional accuracy. Ivy held the portrait with reverence, studying her own face. I'm pretty. The statement wasn't vain, just surprised. Will's throat constricted, understanding that his granddaughter had been carrying ugliness inside for so long that seeing herself beautiful came as revelation. You are, inside and outside. Roz's words were matter-of-fact, stating truth without embellishment. Can I keep it? It's yours. I drew it for you. Ivy immediately taped the portrait to the wall beside her bed when they got home. Will stood in the doorway watching her arrange it just so, moving it 3 inches left, then 2 inches right, finding the exact position where afternoon light would hit it perfectly. Grandpa, I really like Miss Roz. The declaration held weight beyond its simple words. Me too, sweetheart. Do you think she'll keep coming? I hope so. February arrived with the kind of cold that made Chicago infamous wind off the lake, cutting through layers of clothing like they weren't there. The custody hearing loomed 6 weeks away, and Will's lawyer kept calling with updates that sounded encouraging but felt ominous. Natalie was doing well in therapy. Her supervised visits with Ivy had gone smoothly. Will didn't mention any of this to Roz. Their Saturday mornings had become sacred space separate from the complications of his life. But Tommy noticed the tension, pulled him aside one morning while Roz was teaching Ivy some shading technique. You going to tell her about what about April? About maybe losing Ivy? About whatever's got you wound tight as a spring? Will watched Roz's head bent close to Ivy's, both of them focused on the drawing taking shape between them. It's not her problem. Maybe not. But you're making it alone when you don't have to. I've been alone for nearly 3 years. I'm good at it." Tommy wiped down the counter with more force than necessary. Being good at something doesn't mean it's good for you. The conversation stuck in Will's head through the week. Saturday morning, February 15th. Will arrived at Riverside to find Rose already there. Unusual, she was punctual, but never early. She sat at their booth staring at untouched coffee, face drawn, shoulders curved inward. Will slid into the seat across from her, waved Tommy off when he started to approach. "I need to tell you something, before Ivy gets here." Her voice was flat, carefully controlled. "Okay. I got a phone call yesterday. From my brother-in-law Lyle, Martin's younger brother. He just got out of prison 18 months for drug charges. He's broke, homeless, says he needs money. There was life insurance from the accident, $250,000. I'm the sole beneficiary. Lyle wants half. Says Martin would have wanted him to have it, that family takes care of family. If I don't give it to him voluntarily, he's going to sue." The words tumbled out like she'd been holding them back with physical force. "How much of the money do you have left?" "Most of it. I've been living on my pension and Social Security, trying not to touch the insurance because—" her voice cracked, "because it's all I have left from them. Spending it feels like erasing them completely." Will reached across the table, covered her hand with his. "You don't have to give him anything." "I know, but he'll sue. And even if I win, the legal fees will eat half of it anyway. And the whole time I'll have to relive the accident and depositions testimony." "I can't. I'm barely holding together as it is." The door chimed. Ivy came in, cheeks red from cold, looking around for them. Her face brightened when she spotted them, started weaving through tables. Roz pulled her hand back, wiped at her eyes, composed her expression into something approximating normal. But Ivy wasn't fooled. She climbed into the booth next to Will, looked between them with concern that made her seem older than 8. "What's wrong?" Roz managed a smile that didn't convince anyone. "Just some grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." Ivy wasn't satisfied, but let it drop. Tommy brought hot chocolate without being asked, extra marshmallows, and Ivy focused on fishing them out with a spoon, while Will and Roz maintained careful conversation around the elephant taking up space at their table. The morning felt wrong, rhythms disrupted. They parted earlier than usual, Roz claiming errands she needed to run. Sunday brought the supervised visit with Natalie. Will drove Ivy to the zoo, met Natalie and her therapist, Dr. Wendy Morrison. 2 hours of watching Ivy with her mother Natalie trying too hard, Ivy being polite rather than natural. Driving home, Ivy was quiet until they were almost back to the apartment. Mom asked if I wanted to live with her. Will's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did you say?" "That I needed to think about it." She looked sad. The ache in Will's chest spread to his throat. "Your mom loves you very much. She's getting better, doing really hard work to be healthy for you. But I live with you. Right now, yes. But after the judge decides." Will pulled into their building's parking lot, put the truck in park, turned to face his granddaughter. "I don't know, sweetheart. I wish I could promise you'd stay with me forever, but I can't control what the judge decides. Whatever happens, you'll still have me and your mom both, just in different ways." Ivy's eyes filled with tears, and Will unbuckled both their seatbelts so he could pull her into his lap. "I don't want to choose. I don't want to hurt anybody. You won't have to choose. The judge will decide based on what's best for you. But what if best for me is both? Then we'll figure that out." Promises he couldn't guarantee comfort built on sand. The week ground forward. Tuesday, Roz called. First time they'd spoken outside Saturday mornings, hearing her voice on his phone felt simultaneously natural and momentous. "I'm sorry about this weekend. I dumped my problems on you and then ran away." Will was loading laundry, phone tucked between shoulder and ear. "You didn't dump anything. You trusted me with something hard. There's a difference. Still, it wasn't fair. You have your own things to deal with. So do you. Maybe we're both tired of dealing with them alone." Silence on the line long enough that Will thought the call had dropped. Then Roz's voice, smaller than he'd heard it. "I've been alone since the accident. 27 months of alone. Some days I go entire weeks without speaking to anyone except checkout clerks. I tell myself I prefer it, that people are too complicated. But then I sit at your table on Saturdays and Ivy shows me drawings and you listen when I talk, and I remember that alone and lonely aren't the same thing. Will sat down on the folding table, forgot about the laundry. I know exactly what you mean. Do you? Because you have Ivy. You have Tommy. You have people. I have people I'm responsible for. People who need me to be functional. That's different than having people I can be broken with. Is that what we are broken together? Maybe. Or maybe we're just two people who know what it's like to survive when survival wasn't guaranteed. Roz made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been tears. I'm going to tell Lyle no. He can sue if he wants. I'll deal with it. Good. They talked for another 40 minutes. About nothing important, a documentary Roz had watched, a consultation job Will had coming up, whether Chicago winters were getting worse or they were just getting older. Wednesday brought a call from Lyle. The voice was rough, aggressive male entitlement wrapped in addict's desperation. You're the fireman she's been seeing. Old guy she met at some coffee shop. Tell her to give me what's mine or I'll make both your lives miserable. Will's decades of dealing with people in crisis gave him particular patience. Call this number again and I'll report you for harassment. She owes me. Martin was my brother. Martin's dead. And you being his brother doesn't entitle you to money he left his wife. I just got out. I need help getting back on my feet. There are programs for that. This isn't one of them. Will hung up, blocked the number, called his lawyer to document the contact. The weeks blurred together February into early March. Saturday mornings became anchors, the one point in each week Will could count on. Roz started bringing coffee for herself, fancy stuff from a place near her apartment. Ivy's drawings proliferated, taped to every available surface in Will's apartment. The custody hearing date loomed March 20th, 3 weeks away. Roz noticed the tension ratcheting up in Will even when he tried to hide it. Second Saturday in March, she waited until Ivy went to the bathroom, then looked at him with an intensity that demanded truth. Talk to me. Whatever it is, it's eating you from the inside. Will had kept it private, separate from the sanctuary of their mornings. But Tommy's words from weeks ago echoed, being good at alone doesn't mean it's good for you. Custody hearing. 3 weeks from Tuesday. Natalie wants Ivy back full time. I might lose her. The words felt like admitting failure. Roz reached across the table, both hands covering his, anchoring him to the moment. Tell me. So he did. The whole architecture of his fear. Natalie's recovery, the supervised visits going well, the lawyer's careful optimism that really meant uncertainty, Ivy's confession that she didn't want to choose, the awful probability that any judge would favor a healthy biological mother over a 62-year-old grandfather. Roz listened without interrupting, and when Will finally ran out of words, she didn't offer platitudes. You're terrified you'll lose the last piece of Harrison you have left. Will's throat closed. He managed to nod. And you think if that happens you'll have failed both of them. Failed Helen by not being able to keep the family together. Failed Harrison by not protecting his daughter. How did you? Because it's the same thing I felt when Martin and Elliot died and I survived. Like somehow I should have been able to prevent it. Or if I couldn't prevent it, I should have died with them. Survivor's guilt dressed up as responsibility. Will looked at this woman across from him, broken in different ways, but understanding the precise geography of his pain. What if she's better off with Natalie? What if I'm being selfish keeping her? Are you taking care of her because it's what you need, or because it's what she needs? Both. Then you're not being selfish. You're being human. And Ivy needs humans, not saints. Ivy returned from the bathroom and the conversation shifted to safer topics. But something had changed in the space between them, some wall coming down that neither had acknowledged building. When they left the cafe that morning, Roz touched Will's arm. You're not alone in this. The simple statement cracked something in Will's chest that had been sealed since Helen died. Neither are you. March accelerated toward the hearing. Roz helped without being asked. She started coming over on Wednesday evenings, ostensibly to teach Ivy watercolor painting, but really providing a female presence in the household that felt natural rather than performed. 2 weeks before the hearing, Natalie requested a family meeting. Will, Natalie, Ivy, and both therapists, Ivy's Dr. Brennan and Natalie's Dr. Morrison. They met at a neutral location, a conference room at the Family Services Building. Natalie had changed in the nearly 2 years since her hospitalization. Still thin but healthier. Color in her face, steadiness in her hands. She'd cut her hair short. Professional gotten a promotion at Target to assistant manager. She looked at Will with an expression he recognized from Harrison: determination mixed with fear of disappointing someone. "I know you don't trust me. I don't blame you. I fell apart when Ivy needed me most and you picked up the pieces. You've been her rock for nearly 3 years while I was drowning. But I'm not drowning anymore." Will kept his voice neutral. "I can see that. I'm glad you're doing better. I don't want to take her from you. I want us to both be in her life. But she's my daughter. I need to be her mother again, not just the woman who visits on weekends." Ivy sat between them, 8 years old and carrying weight no child should bear. "Ivy, how do you feel about what your mom just said?" Ivy looked at the ceiling, a strategy she'd developed for thinking hard without crying. "I want Grandpa Will, but I also want Mom. Can't I just have both?" "You can have both, sweetie. What we're trying to figure out is what that looks like day to day. I like living with Grandpa. My school is there. My friends. Miss Roz comes over and teaches me painting. But I miss Mom, too. I miss having a mom who's there when I wake up." The admission landed hard. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "I miss being there when you wake up. I miss being your mom instead of a visitor." They talked for 2 hours, circling the same territory from different angles. Natalie wanted primary custody with generous visitation for Will. Will wanted to maintain primary with expanded custody for Natalie. The therapist suggested compromise shared custody alternating weeks or a 4-to-3 split. Ivy wanted what was impossible: everyone in the same house, the family intact. No resolution, just more clarity about how much pain everyone was carrying. Walking to his truck afterward, Will's phone buzzed. Text from Roz. "How did it go?" He called instead of texting back. "About as well as could be expected," which means terribly, but nobody screamed. Roz's voice carried understanding. "Want company? I can bring wine." Will thought about his empty apartment, the silence that would greet him. Thought about Roz's admission that she went weeks without talking to anyone. "Yeah, I'd like that." She arrived an hour later carrying 2 bottles of red wine and takeout from the Thai place on Lincoln. They ate at Will's kitchen table while Ivy painted in her room. The wine loosened something, let the fear out from behind the walls he'd built. What if the judge sides with Natalie? What if I don't get to tuck Ivy in anymore? Don't get to make her Saturday pancakes? Don't get to be the person she comes to when nightmares wake her up? Then you'll visit. You'll call. You'll still be her grandfather. The relationship doesn't disappear because the living arrangements change. But it won't be the same. No, it won't be. Roz didn't offer false comfort, and Will loved her for it. Love, the thought stopped him cold. When had it become love? When had this woman with one leg and a sketchbook full of ghosts become the person he most wanted to talk to? He looked at her across his kitchen table, wine glass in hand, eyes reflecting the overhead light, and realized the when didn't matter. It had happened. Probably weeks ago. Maybe the first Saturday when Ivy spoke up and offered a stranger their booth. What Roz had noticed him staring. Nothing. Just thank you. For being here. For listening. For giving a damn about an old man and his problems. You're 62, not 80. And your problems are real. Don't diminish them. Everything's real when you're in it. The trick is perspective. And what's your perspective? Will set down his wine glass, met her eyes directly. That I'm grateful you walked into Riverside 3 months ago looking for a place to sit. Roz's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through her usual guardedness. I'm grateful you said yes. The moment stretched between them, possibility hanging in the air like a question neither quite knew how to ask. Ivy called from her room needing help with something and the spell broke. But later when Roz left, she kissed Will's cheek at the door, her lips warm against his skin, and the gesture carried promise of something neither had named yet. The final week before the hearing moved like honey, slow and thick. Will couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly, ran through testimony in his head at 3 in the morning. Saturday before the Tuesday hearing, Will and Ivy arrived at Riverside to find Roz already there, sketchbook open, drawing something with fierce concentration. She looked up when they slid into the booth, and her expression held determination Will hadn't seen before. "I have something for you both." She turned the sketchbook around. A family portrait, Will, Ivy, and Roz herself sitting at their usual table. Not separate figures, but clearly together a unit. Ivy reaching across the table, Will's hand on Roz's shoulder, all of them smiling like people who'd found something worth keeping. For luck. For the hearing. To remember that no matter what the judge decides Tuesday, you're not alone. Either of you. Ivy took the sketchbook, studied the portrait with seriousness. "This is us. All three of us." She looked at Roz with an expression beyond her years. "Are you going to be part of our family?" The question hung in the air, impossible to answer without promising things none of them could control. Roz glanced at Will, asking permission, receiving a slight nod. "I'd like to be, if that's okay with you. I want you to be." Ivy's declaration was simple, absolute. "Then I will be. However that looks, whatever shape it takes." Will felt his eyes burning. 62 years old and crying in a cafe because a woman he'd known 3 months just promised to stay in his granddaughter's life. Tommy appeared with breakfast, set it down, looked at the portrait and nodded approval. "About damn time you all figured out what was obvious to everyone else." That night, Ivy taped the portrait next to the one Roz had drawn of her alone. Will stood in her doorway watching her arrange them, this child who'd lost so much and somehow still had the courage to let new people in. Before bed, she whispered to him, "Grandpa, whatever happens Tuesday, we'll still have Saturdays at Riverside, right? Always. That's our tradition. Nothing changes that. Even if I have to live with Mom, even then, we'll figure it out." Promises built on hope rather than certainty. But what else could he offer? Monday night, Will lay awake, staring at his ceiling, running through every possible outcome. His phone lit up with a text. "Roz. Can't sleep either." He called her. "Tomorrow's going to be hard." Her voice in the darkness felt like anchor. "It is. But you've done hard before. This is just a different kind of fire. What if I lose her?" Then you grieve. And then you figure out how to love her in whatever form you're allowed. That's all any of us can do. Keep loving the people we're given for as long as we're given them. Will closed his eyes, let her words settle into the spaces fear had hollowed out. "Will you be there? At the courthouse? If you want me, I want you. Then I'll be there." They stayed on the phone until Will finally felt sleep pulling at him. Ross's breathing had evened out 20 minutes earlier, but neither had hung up, both needing the connection more than rest. Tuesday morning arrived too soon, and not soon enough. The Cook County Family Court building wore its aged, poorly concrete facade stained by decades of Chicago weather. Will arrived 40 minutes early, wearing the navy suit he'd bought for Helen's funeral. The fabric smelled like mothballs and memory. Roz was waiting on the courthouse steps despite the March wind. She wore a charcoal dress, hair pulled back severe, leaning on her crutches. When she saw Will, something in her posture softened. "You came. I told you I would." Will's lawyer, Michael Brennan, arrived in a hurry. 50-something, going gray at the temples, expensive shoes that had seen better days. He'd handled Will's retirement paperwork nearly 4 years ago, charged reasonable rates because Will's engine company had once pulled him from a burning row house. "Morning. Ready." Will nodded. Roz squeezed his arm, steadying him. The courtroom was smaller than Will expected, wood paneling dark with age, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Judge Patricia Winters presided from a bench designed to make everyone below feel appropriately insignificant. Mid-60s, white hair, cut efficiency, short eyes that had seen every variation of family tragedy. Natalie sat at the plaintiff's table with her lawyer, Rebecca Cho. She'd dressed carefully professional but maternal. She glanced back at Will, once expression unreadable, then focused forward. Judge Winters spoke with clipped efficiency. "This is a custody modification hearing. Mrs. Hartford seeks to regain primary custody of her minor daughter, Ivy Marie Hartford, currently in the temporary care of her grandfather, William Hartford. My determination will be based solely on the best interests of Ivy Hartford. Facts matter." Understood. Both lawyers affirmed understanding. Natalie testified first. Her lawyer walked her through the narrative. Happy marriage to Harrison Ivy's birth. The shock of his death alongside Helen's, the compounding grief that became clinical depression. The hospitalization wasn't shameful, just necessary. 8 months of intensive treatment, nearly 2 years of supervised visits that went beautifully. Ms. Hartford, how do you feel about your recovery? Natalie's hands were steady. I feel strong. Not perfect. I'll never be perfect. But I'm managing my mental health the way someone manages diabetes. It's a condition I have, not who I am, and I've proven I can be a stable, loving parent while managing it. Michael Brennan cross-examined gently. Therapy sessions per week, just one, medication still being adjusted. No stable for 8 months, employment still at Target recently promoted, housing 2-year lease paid through next year. Each answer chipped away at the argument that Natalie was unstable. Dr. Wendy Morrison testified next, Natalie's therapist. Professional warmth credentials from Northwestern, a decade treating post-traumatic grief. In your professional opinion, is Natalie Hartford capable of providing primary care for her daughter? Dr. Morrison didn't hesitate. Yes, she's done the work. Deep, difficult therapeutic work. She's not the same person who was hospitalized nearly 3 years ago. She knows her triggers, has coping strategies, maintains treatment, and has demonstrated consistent stability. Will testified after lunch. He took the witness stand with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't. Michael Brennan walked him through the basics. 30 years, Chicago Fire Department, retired nearly 4 years ago, living on pension and consulting work. Stable housing, Ivy thriving in local school. Mr. Hartford, why should you maintain primary custody? Will chose his words carefully. Because Ivy needs consistency. She's been through enormous trauma, losing her father and grandmother, her mother's hospitalization, nearly 3 years of adjustment. She's finally stable. Talking again, making friends, doing well in school. Uprooting her now could undo that progress. Rebecca Cho's cross-examination came sideways. Mr. Hartford, how old are you? 62, raising an 8-year-old. Do you have the energy for that long term? I've managed fine for nearly 3 years, but she'll be a teenager soon. Are you confident you can provide that at your age? Age doesn't determine capability. I'm healthy, active, engaged in her life. You mentioned stability, but you've introduced a new person into Ivy's life recently, haven't you? A Ms. Rosalind Keating. Roz is a friend. She's been kind to Ivy, more than a friend according to your phone records. Would you characterize this as a romantic relationship? We care about each other. So you're dating. Introducing a romantic partner into a traumatized child's life. How is that stability? Michael Brennan objected. Judge Winters overruled. Roz has been nothing but positive for Ivy. She helps Ivy express feelings she can't verbalize. But it's new. Another change. Another person she's getting attached to who might not be permanent. Ivy benefits from having multiple supportive adults in her life. The answer hung inadequate against the insinuation. Dr. Patricia Brennan testified about Ivy's therapeutic progress. Selective mutism breakthrough, continued sessions. In your opinion, would a change in custody harm Ivy's progress? Change always carries risk. But children are resilient with proper support. If handled carefully with ongoing therapy and clear communication, Ivy could adapt. The testimony went on for hours. Character witnesses for both sides. By 4 o'clock, Judge Winters called a recess for Ivy's private interview. Will paced the hallway. 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. When they returned, Judge Winters' expression revealed nothing. I've heard from Ivy, smart kid, mature for her age, clearly loves both her mother and grandfather. Judge Winters looked between Will and Natalie. This is not a case of one fit parent and one unfit. Both are capable. The question is what serves Ivy's best interests. Will's heart hammered. After reviewing all testimony and speaking with Ivy, I'm ordering shared custody. Mrs. Hartford will have primary physical custody during the school year, with Mr. Hartford having Ivy every weekend, Friday through Sunday, plus 1 evening weekly. During summer, this reverses. Holidays alternate annually. Both parties will maintain regular therapy and participate in co-parenting counseling. The ruling hit Will like a physical blow. Not everything he'd wanted, but not the worst outcome. Shared meant shared weekends, summers, regular presence. This arrangement begins with a 6-week transition period. Mrs. Hartford will document transitions and work with Dr. Brennan. Mr. Hartford will support this without undermining authority. Both will remember that Ivy's well-being trumps personal feelings. Judge Winter's gavel came down. Court adjourned. Natalie approached him in the hallway, eyes red, but expression determined. "I don't want this to be a war. I know you love her. I'm grateful you've taken care of her." Her voice dropped. "I'm sorry. For falling apart, for leaving you to pick up the pieces. None of this is what Harrison would have wanted. He'd want us to take care of her. Together. That's what we're going to do." Outside, Roz was waiting. Will walked to her on autopilot. She opened her arms and he stepped into the embrace. "Shared custody. I get weekends and summers. She lives with Natalie during school." Roz held him tighter. "You didn't lose her. Feels like I did. You still have her. Every weekend, every summer, every Wednesday dinner. That's not nothing." They drove in silence. The apartment felt cavernous. Roz followed him inside, started making coffee while Will sat at the kitchen table. "I need to tell you something about why this hurts so much." Will's voice sounded foreign. "When Harrison died and Helen was already gone, Ivy was the only thing that kept me from walking into Lake Michigan and not coming back." Roz didn't flinch. "You were suicidal. For about 6 months. Never told anyone. Got close a few times, but then Ivy would need something. So I'd stay one more day. Until the days added up." Roz reached across the table. "I know exactly what you mean. I tried 3 times in the first year after the accident. Pills once. Drove to a bridge at 2 in the morning, sat there for 4 hours. Stood in my bathroom with Martin's razor." "What stopped you?" "The thought that maybe surviving meant something. That I was supposed to be here for a reason. And the fear that Elliot would be disappointed in me." Will looked at her with eyes that held understanding. "I think about what Helen would say. Whether she'd be proud or ashamed that I couldn't hold the family together. She'd be proud you kept Ivy alive and helped Natalie recover. That's what Helen would care about." "How do you know?" "Because that's what people who love us want for us to survive and help others survive." Will's phone buzzed. Text from Ivy. "Mom says I'm moving in 6 weeks. Are you okay, Grandpa?" He typed back. "I'm okay, sweetheart. You deserve to be with your mom. I'll still see you every weekend. Promise, promise. Nothing changes our Saturdays at Riverside." Will looked at Roz across his kitchen table. "I don't want to lose you, too. You're not losing me. How can you be sure everything ends? Because I'm choosing to stay, not because I have to, because I want to." Why Roz moved to the chair next to him. "Because you said yes when everyone else said no. Because you see me as a person instead of a tragedy. Because Ivy makes me laugh and you make me feel less alone. Because for the first time since my family died, I don't wake up wishing I'd died with them." Will turned to face her. "I'm 62 years old. I have a granddaughter who's going to need me less and less. I have a pension that's adequate but not generous. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment that hasn't been updated since the Reagan administration. I'm not a prize. Neither am I. I'm 56 with 1 leg and PTSD. I have a brother-in-law threatening to sue me. I'm broken in ways that don't heal. Then we're both broken. Maybe that's enough." Roz leaned forward, kissed him with gentleness that felt like permission to want something good. Will kissed her back, tasting coffee and salt, and the particular courage it took to love again after loss had taught you that loving meant eventual pain. When they pulled apart, Roz rested her forehead against his. "I'm terrified." "Me too." "What if we try this and it doesn't work? What if we don't try and spend the rest of our lives wondering what if?" "That's not very comforting. I'm a retired firefighter, not a motivational speaker." That surprised a laugh from her. They sat together holding hands like teenagers 62 and 56 and feeling both ancient and impossibly young. Mid-May brought the lawsuit. Lyle Keating filed suit against Roz claiming half of Martin's life insurance. The legal papers arrived, certified mail, 30 pages of legalese. He actually did it. He's suing. Roz's voice shook on the phone. "We get you a lawyer. We fight it. It's going to cost thousands. Then we make it expensive for him, too. You're not alone in this. They met with Michael Brennan. He's got no case. Best option is a strongly worded response that makes clear you'll countersue for harassment. How much initial response? Couple thousand. Trial could be 15 to 20,000. Roz went pale. Will reached for her hand. Do it. Make it clear we're not backing down. You keep saying we. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. He'd been avoiding this conversation, but suddenly the fear of not saying it outweighed the fear of saying it. Because I love you. And when you love someone, their fights become your fights. Roz's eyes filled with tears. You can't just drop that in a lawyer's office. Would you prefer I waited for a more romantic setting? Michael Brennan cleared his throat. I can step out. Roz laughed through tears. We're fine. Draft the response. Outside, Roz stopped on the sidewalk. I love you too. I've been terrified to say it because everyone I've loved has died. But that's magical thinking. Love doesn't protect anyone from loss. It just makes the time we have matter more. Will pulled her close, kissed her on a Chicago sidewalk while commuters streamed around them. So, we're doing this, apparently. June brought the court date. Will kept his promise. He sat in the gallery, Tommy beside him, two of Roz's former nursing colleagues present. Lyle Keating looked haggard, 33 but devastated by addiction. His lawyer argued that Martin had always supported his brother, that the life insurance was family money. Michael Brennan countered with documentation. Martin's will text messages expressing frustration with Lyle's addiction, police reports from restraining orders filed for theft. By mid-afternoon, the judge had heard enough. This is straightforward. Mr. Keating was not named in his brother's will. The life insurance lists Mrs. Keating as sole beneficiary. Illinois law is clear. Absent fraud or coercion, the beneficiary designation stands. Case dismissed. Lyle approached them in the hallway. You couldn't spare anything, I'm family. Roz faced him with steel. You stole from Martin when he was alive. You chose drugs over family repeatedly. I'm sorry you're struggling, but that's not my responsibility. Martin would have helped me. Martin did help you. Multiple rehab programs, job opportunities. I'm not obligated to continue enabling you. Lyle turned and left, shoulders hunched. Outside, Roz let herself cry. Will held her. It's over. Summer arrived. Ivy came to Will's full-time per the custody arrangement. Roz became a fixture teaching painting workshops at the trauma center, their lives intertwining. One July evening, Ivy was painting while Will and Roz prepared dinner. The domesticity struck Will, the three of them moving around each other with ease. Ivy looked up. Are you two going to get married? Will nearly dropped the knife. Roz froze mid-stir. What makes you ask that, sweetheart? You're together all the time. You kiss sometimes. Mom said people who love each other usually get married. Would that be okay with you? If Roz and I got married someday, Ivy considered with visible seriousness. I think so. I like when she's here. And you're happier. You smile more. Well, we're not rushing into anything. But if we did, you'd be the first to know. Deal, deal. Ivy went back to painting. Will returned to the kitchen where Roz was gripping the spoon. So, marriage. I think I want to say yes when you ask me, but I also think we should wait. Let Natalie get fully stable. Let Ivy adjust. Build the foundation strong enough to hold a marriage. How long? 6 months. By December, it'll be a year since we met. Will pulled her close. 6 months. I can wait if it means doing this right. September brought Ivy back to school. October arrived with perfect fall weather. One Saturday, all four of them met at Riverside. Ivy showed them a family tree project that included Roz's name. Miss Roz, you're in my family tree. Roz studied the construction paper, touched. I'm honored. Natalie smiled, genuine rather than forced. You should be there. Ivy talks about you constantly. You're important to her. November passed in preparations. Will coordinated with Tommy to close Riverside for December 14th, 1 year exactly since he and Roz first met. The ring felt heavier each day waiting. December 14th arrived clear and cold. Will arrived early with Ivy. Remember, don't tell Miss Roz, I won't tell Grandpa. The cafe was closed to regular customers, just their people. Tommy had decorated simply white lights, flowers on their table. Roz arrived at 9:30. She walked through the door, saw the closed cafe, then the gathered crowd. "What's happening?" Will stood, walked to her, took her hands. "1 year ago today, you walked into this cafe looking for a place to sit. I said yes. And that decision changed my life." He lowered to one knee, pulled out the ring box. Ivy's delighted gasp echoed. "Rosalind Keating. I'm 62 years old. I don't have decades left, but whatever time I have, I want to spend it with you. You've shown me that life doesn't end when the people we love die. It just changes shape. Will you marry me?" Roz's face did something complicated. Shock, joy, tears, laughter. "You planned all this? With help. This time when I ask, I'm not rushing. I'm not scared. I'm just a man who loves you." Roz pulled him to his feet, kissed him in front of everyone. "Yes, absolutely yes." The cafe erupted. Ivy launched herself at both of them. Tommy brought champagne and sparkling cider. Natalie stood surprising everyone. "I didn't know Harrison's father before my husband died, but today I'm getting to know Will, the man who found love again. Roz, thank you for loving them both. My daughter deserves all the love she can get." The celebration lasted hours. By late afternoon, just Will, Roz, Ivy, Natalie, and Tommy remained. "So when's the wedding?" "Soon. We've waited long enough." January. Something small. Just us and the people who matter. January works. Here. Where else? The wedding took place. January 25th. Tommy had the cafe decorated with winter flowers. 40 guests filled the space. Ivy served as flower girl in a purple dress. Natalie sat in the front row. Tommy officiated. "I've known Will Hartford for 37 years. I knew Helen, and I can say with certainty she'd approve, not because Roz is replacing her, nobody could, but because Helen would want Will to keep living, keep loving, keep finding reasons to get up in the morning." The vows were simple. Will spoke first. "Roz, I thought my story ended when I was 59. Then you asked if you could share my table, and I learned that stories don't end. They just start new chapters. You're my second chapter. Not my second chance, you're something entirely new." Roz's voice shook. "Will, you saw me when I was invisible? You said yes when everyone else said no. You taught me that broken doesn't mean worthless. I love you. Not despite our scars, but because of them. Because we know what it costs to be here, and we're choosing it anyway." Tommy pronounced them married. The cafe erupted. Will kissed his wife while Ivy cheered and cameras flashed. Late in the evening, Ivy climbed into the booth between them. "I'm glad you got married. We're glad too, sweetheart. Now your Grandma Roz right." Roz's eyes filled. "If you want me to be, I want you to be." 10 years later, December 2032. Will Hartford was 72, and Rosalind Keating Hartford was 66. They still came to Riverside every Saturday morning, still sat at the same booth, though these days they moved a little slower. Tommy was 78 now, finally letting his daughter help run the place. Ivy Hartford was 18, freshman at Northwestern, studying psychology with a focus on trauma counseling. This Saturday she was there, animated about a research project. "You should come speak to my class, Grandma Roz. Talk about the support group. I'm not a public speaker." "Yes, you are. You speak to trauma survivors every week." The Second Chances Foundation had started small, just Will and Roz running a support group for widows and widowers over 50. 5 years in, they'd formalized it. The foundation now ran 3 programs: peer support groups, art therapy workshops, and consultation services. In 10 years, they'd helped over 300 people. Ivy's phone buzzed. "Mom wants to know if you're coming to dinner tonight." Natalie had remarried 3 years ago. They hosted monthly dinners. "Tell her we'll be there. And tell her I'm bringing dessert." After breakfast, they walked to the park, sat on a bench. "You ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "Saying yes. Marrying an old man." Roz took his hand. "Not once. Not even when it's hard. You never." That evening, the extended family gathered at Natalie's. Will and Roz, Natalie and Robert, Ivy, and her girlfriend Maya. Tommy had been invited but declined, wanting them to have family time. Will watched it all unfold, this family they'd assembled from broken pieces. Not perfect, still carrying scars, but functional in ways that mattered. Driving home, Roz was quiet. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. How we got here. How close I came to not being here at all. I'm 66. I've outlived Martin by 16 years. And some days I still feel guilty about being here when they're not." Will pulled into their parking lot. "You know what I think Martin and Elliot would want? For you to be happy. For you to help other people survive. For you to keep living in ways that make the world better. You think so, I know so. Because that's what Helen wanted for me. We honor the dead by living well, not by dying with them." Roz kissed him. "How did I get so lucky to find you? You walked into a cafe looking for a place to sit. I said yes. That's not luck, that's choice." Saturday morning, December 21st, 2032. Will and Roz arrived at Riverside, claimed their usual booth. Tommy brought coffee without asking. The cafe was packed. And standing near the door looking lost was a man in his mid-60s. Salt and pepper hair, dark circles under his eyes, wedding ring he kept touching like a talisman. Will watched him approach, tables get turned away. The man's shoulders dropped with each rejection. Roz noticed Will watching. "He looks like you did. That first morning." "Yeah, he does." The man started toward the door. Will caught his eye, raised a hand. "Excuse me, there's room here if you'd like." The man stopped, turned, looked at them with hope warring with exhaustion. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. We've got plenty of space." The man navigated to their table, lowered himself with careful movements. "Thank you. I've been trying to find somewhere quiet to sit." Will extended his hand. "Will Hartford. This is my wife Roz. David Morrison. I appreciate this." Tommy appeared with coffee. David wrapped his hands around the mug. "I know this is strange. I needed to get out. My wife died 3 months ago. Cancer. And the holidays it's our first Christmas without her, and everywhere I go I'm surrounded by happy families and it feels like drowning." Will and Roz exchanged a look. "I'm sorry for your loss. How long were you married? 42 years. I keep waiting for it to get easier, but it doesn't. It won't get easier. Not the way people mean, but it changes. The grief doesn't disappear, but you learn to carry it differently. You sound like you know." "I'm a widower too. Lost my first wife 11 years ago. Lost my son the same year." David's eyes widened. "And you're remarried? To Roz, who lost her husband and son in a car accident. We're a matched set of broken people who found each other by accident. We run a support group for people who've lost spouses. Second Chances Foundation. Tuesday nights in Lincoln Park. You're welcome. I don't know. I'm not really a group person. Neither was I. But it helps." Will pulled out his phone. "Give me your number. I'll text you the address." "No pressure." David's hands shook slightly. "Okay. Yeah. Thank you." They sat with David for over an hour. When he finally left, he shook both their hands. "Thank you. For the seat. For listening. For making me feel less alone. Come Tuesday, 7 o'clock. I'll think about it." They watched him walk out, shoulders a little straighter. Roz leaned against Will's shoulder. "You think he'll come?" "Maybe. Maybe not. But we offered. That's all we can do." Will looked around Riverside, the cafe where he'd met Roz, where they'd gotten engaged, married, where they'd spent hundreds of Saturday mornings. "You know what I was thinking? That Helen was right. She told me not to stop living when she was gone. I thought she meant just keep existing. But she meant this. Keep helping people. Keep saying yes. Keep making room at the table." Roz kissed his cheek. "She'd be proud of you. She'd be proud of both of us." Will paid the check, walked out into December sunshine with his wife. But first he pulled Roz close, kissed her in the parking lot the way he had a decade ago, because at 72, Will Hartford knew the truth. You never knew how much time you had, so you treated every moment like it mattered. You said yes to strangers who needed a place to sit. You built families from choice instead of just blood. You kept showing up, kept loving, kept making space at your table for whoever walked through the door looking lost. And if you were very lucky, Someone sat down across from you and decided to stay.